So good morning, dear colleagues, and good time of the day, online participants. My name is Ocal Necmioglu. I represent here Dr. Bernardo Aliaga, who is the section chief, section head of the Tsunami Resilience section at the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission of UNESCO. It's really great privilege to be here with you, and I thank Koshimura Sensei for the kind invitation. I thank Dr. Laura Kong for her the usual very excellent introductory presentation. The additional benefits of such forum, at least for me, is also to get interacted with the stakeholders. It's going to give me the very first time the opportunity to meet the distinguished director of fieldworks today. So I'm going to try to focus on the role of the impact-based tsunami inundation forecasting in the tsunami resilience, but obviously it's not going to be a very original presentation. I'm just going to provide or try to provide some reflections in my humble capacity. My background is in geophysics. I have earthquake seismology and nuclear test explosion seismology background. And then I was in charge before joining the UNESCO of a tsunami early warning system in the Eastern Mediterranean, one of the tsunami service providers. So I'm more coming from the technical and operational background and try to reflect how this framework actually could fit and in resolving the societal challenges that we need to talk. Just allow me to give you a short overview of what is available today in terms of warning delivery. Now, we have the tsunami service providers. These are centers like Pacific Tsunami Warning Center or Japanese Meteorological Agency, which have the capability to detect and assess tsunami threats over a large region, and that has been accepted by the intergovernmental coordination groups of the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission to disseminate these threat assessments to other member states. At the national level, we have the National Tsunami Warning Centers that are operated by the member states with authority by law or otherwise by different regulations and settings to communicate these warning messages and alert their citizens. And of course, it is expected that these agencies would also have the capability to really direct and guide and provide necessary assistance to their national disaster management, emergency management operational centers and authorities. But in the very classical sense, following the earthquake example, the detection of the event actually triggers the mechanism. You start with the identification of the earthquake parameters, the magnitude, the depth, etc., the location, and you would try to understand whether it has a possibility to generate a tsunami. In a very classical sense, it is directed by a decision matrix that puts certain criteria together that allows the operational center to make an assessment whether that earthquake has the potential to generate a tsunami. These parameters are the magnitude, the depth of the event, and the location, and of course, this can get more complicated. Well, once the initial message is produced, then you would make use of certain additional tools. This can be a pre-calculated scenario database or real-time simulations. Of course, you would rely on the sea level measurements, and at the same time, the seismological data analysis will continue. The evolution of the data will lead to better assessments, reducing the uncertainty, and that means that revisions are possible in the warning messages disseminated. In the very classical sense, you get a text message, the one as you see on the left, that seems very easy for us who are in the business, but since I joined this tsunami resilience more than a decade ago, I've constantly received that feedback saying that it's so difficult to understand what these messages in the time of the crisis. And that complaint has never changed. In some examples, we have this visual products. This is a very simple representation from an Eastern Mediterranean, which shows graphically what that text means. Maybe easier to understand the alert level with different colors regionally at the tsunami forecast points with the associated arrival times. Of course, there are advanced models, just like the Pacific Tsunami Warning Center, but the principal concept does not change. You still rely on the detection of the source phenomena. You rely on the earthquake parameters, and you make revisions. You apply certain criteria to issue these products, and then the seismic analysis continue. With the more and refined data, in the case of the WFE phase centroid moment intensive solutions, then you can go for the real-time simulations if you have the necessary in-house computing capabilities. And if you do that for alerts that have been of or events that are considered as tsunamigenic potential, then you issue tsunami threat messages with maps, statistics, tables, and other products that can assist the decision makers, emergency managers in their response. Examples from the Pacific Tsunami Warning Center are the Coastal Tsunami Amplitude Forecast polygons, representing the area of interest where the risk is a potential problem, rather than concentrating on the offshore areas. But to complement it, it also provides with an tsunami amplitude forecast to give an idea about where the energy is focusing. So how the event is actually will propagate and what are the potential areas of impact. And lastly, it also provides an estimate of the tsunami amplitude forecast based on the modeling. Of course, very useful, very important to have, and starts the initial process, but still complicated. Well, the whole upstream component needs to be complemented with the downstream component that Dr. Kong very nicely elaborated, which is framed under the Tsunami Radio Recognition Program or similar initiatives at the national capacities. The 12 indicators are listed here. The very first 3 are the ones that are directly perhaps related to the first initial stage of the warning. The tsunami hazard zones, mapping and designated. The number of people at risk in the tsunami hazard zone is quite sufficiently estimated, and the identification of the economic, infrastructural, political and social resources. And of course, this completes the framework of the warning chain. Well, a little bit time maybe was reflected before, and then Kushimura Sensei also pointed out, but of course, we are dealing with uncertainties. That is probably the most important thing in this business, if you allow me to say so. The uncertainties start even from the source description, the seismogenic secting. We idealize the earthquake as a rectangular area with a certain parameters associated to it. But the reality is far more different than that. It's very much complicated. On top of this, you have the realities and complications coming from the bathymetry, from the geomorphology, and all this interaction of the generated tsunami with this domain that it propagates, so that we can come up with this inundation map, and that inundation map can be translated into something useful for the decision maker to make sure that we can save lives. On the paper and on the slide, it looks so simple, but the reality is bitter. It's definitely a very complex and challenging task. Within the Tsunami Radio Recognition Program, we also try to accommodate the impact, the risk elements, identification of the people at risk. This includes local residents, vulnerable populations that we heard a lot yesterday about them, people with disabilities, elderly, young, and non-residents. The demographical change based on the tourist season is very important in certain locations. It's also important to make an estimate about the daytime, nighttime, civilian citizens, demographic distributions, and so that we can guide the decision maker and also the people itself about their needs. The third item is economic, infrastructural, political, and social resources needs to be identified. Within the program itself, it is merely providing a table that you have this amount of schools, buildings, factories, etc. But it doesn't go further than that because it's the national authorities' mandate, that risk domain. Well, the whole framework serves very nicely and successfully the concept of the early warning for all. People-centered, end-to-end warning systems, starting with the observation of the phenomena, ending with saving lives. This is actually what we're trying to do. In a nutshell, from the early warning perspective, allow me to make some reflections about where we are. At time 0, the event happens, following the earthquake example. At that time, the uncertainty of the phenomena, we assume, is at the highest level. Time is our friend. With the time and with the more data, we expect that the uncertainty will go down. This is a very idealistic representation. It will never go down to 0, of course, but time is our friend. But time is our enemy, also at the same time, because tsunami is generated, it propagates, and the stronger and more powerful it is, it will propagate further away. And that means the impact zone will be higher. So it will go to further away, it will impact other regions. This would increase the population at risk. But of course, the growth of that rate is going to be less, because we would assume that at one stage we will be able to provide a tsunami warning. That means at least in the further areas that you go more to the right side, that the number of the people under risk will be less because they will have ample time to evacuate. Well, at certain time, there is going to be a tsunami early warning. And it's a trade-off between the uncertainty and saving lives. You want to make sure that you send something that is reliable and meaningful and that can be operationally implemented by the end users, and also not discrediting the system, because the false alert has a price. We cannot mobilize millions of people because we estimated the magnitude by 0.5 degree wrong. That is not within our luxury. So what can we do? What can we do to reduce these uncertainties involved at the time the tsunami early warning is issued? In a sense, how can we shift that red curve to the left and a little bit to the bottom to make sure that the warning is more reliable? Well, the whole concept currently, it fits probably to what an economist said more than half a decade ago. It is better to be roughly right than precisely wrong. This is the logic that we're following now, but the question remains about how to improve the system. Well, the answers are probably there. The probabilistic framework has been introduced, which says that the probabilistic tsunami forecasting for tsunami early warning explicitly treats data and forecast uncertainties, enabling alert level definitions according to any predefined level of conservatism, which is connected to the average balance of missed versus false alarms. And impact forecast and resulting recommendations become progressively less uncertain as new data become available. Sounds very good, probabilistic frameworks, but when it comes to communicate this information to the decision maker, maybe it's not a straightforward task. There are contradictory views also from the security domain. Contrary to the conventional wisdom, an article claims that decision makers responding to quantitative probability assessments are less willing to support risky actions and more receptive to gathering additional information. We forget most of the time that our customers, the disaster management authorities, are also elements of the security domain when the event is of a certain severity. So we need to better understand what the crisis manager is responsible for. We think that by providing a message, we are fulfilling our job. No, it starts there. We need to integrate better with the decision makers. So we need to understand their domain to make ourselves and our products and our works more relevant to the end user, who are the ones actually responsible for saving the lives. Now, the impact-based forecasting, we summarized, whereas forecasting traditionally focuses on predicting the hazard level, just like in the example before, new innovative methods focused on forecasting the hazard's impact on different societal sectors. According to the WMO's guidelines on the multi-hazard impact-based forecasting warning services, the impact-based forecasting describes the relationship between the magnitude of the forecast, you can simply say this 3 meters, 5 meters, the color-coded alert, with the actual resulting impact output. But this modeling of this relationship requires input on exposure and vulnerability, two critical words that we need to invest more and closely. Well, one important to make an observation. When we, in the early warning domain, refer to impact, we should realize that in the post-disaster needs assessment domain, impact is something else. What we refer impact is classified as disaster effect in the post-disaster needs assessment domain. The impact that they refer is what has been said yesterday. It's the macroeconomic impact, human and social development impact. So we use the same word in English, but it has two different meanings in two different domains. And that's also very important to understand. One example on the vulnerability from a publication that also Bernardo was involved in it. It summarizes the human vulnerability. It refers to the population, demographic dynamics, vulnerable age groups, that the elderly and the young are being more impacted. But it also says like female mortality is not always higher than male mortality. And the profile the potential woman longevity, gender roles, dependency, and cultural traditions play a very important role. This is just one example. You cannot have a recipe that applies to all. It's very much a societal challenge. And as Professor Alexander said yesterday, it's very important to put in the right context, because you cannot come with a one single recipe that is applicable globally. It's a societal challenge, and the societal challenges are driven by the factors that have a role contributing to them. It's not only a technology problem. So, in a nutshell, the guideline of the WMO summarizes the benefits of the impact-based early warning systems. It says it provides improved planning for different scenarios, better contingency planning, therefore, information about the level of confidence in the forecasts that would convey additional information for better informed decision making, new information to facilitate wider social benefits, that can also form a basis for the post-event analysis to support the response and recovery processes, a comprehensive and coordinated process to address disaster response and preparedness, and most importantly perhaps, to build a common situational awareness among the different stakeholders. And publication from Mertz et al. 2020 summarizes very nicely that the impact-based forecasting provides an opportunity to focus on attention of different disciplines on a common target, but also it has the potential to boost the development of multi-hazard early warning systems. We've been talking about multi-hazard early warning systems for a long time, since the framework of the Sendai, Target G. But maybe only today, in my humble capacity and feeling, we only realize what it means. Initially, it was thought like, okay, you bring this hazard and this hazard and this hazard together, connect them. It's not that. It's beyond that. It's a holistic approach that's integrated in all stages. And probably the impact-based forecasting, the power, is actually lies that convey to decision makers that we can move ahead. Well, perception matters. A publication, again, inspired from the discussions of yesterday. It's often believed that providing members of the public, the people whose lives are on stake, with more accurate and more detailed information about which locations will experience specific hazards or what is the impact should be sufficient to raise awareness about the risk and also to motivate actions. But apparently that's not correlated. While the risk perception can increase, the motivation to act is not there and may not be there necessarily. Distinguished representative mentioned yesterday very nicely, we cannot change the perceptions, perhaps, but we can take them into account and try to find a way how to work around. Well, should we be skeptical? Yes or no? Well, impact-based warnings may be more effective than the phenomenon-based warnings in influencing the recipient's perceptions of the hazardous event, the threat, the potential impacts, but it may not necessarily correspond to a higher level of action. But what's important is that certain studies find out that in terms of action, the relevance comes whether the individuals have gone through that experience in the past. Those who experienced the disaster are more accurate to response. This still remains a challenge because we're trying to communicate, but the nature of the human being is still there. And it's very important to acknowledge this fact. Well, one another important element for Berens et al. The exchange of knowledge between the designer and manufacturer of impact-based models and the end users of those models falls short if novel early warning systems are just seen as a matter of technology transfer. Instead, the development and implementation of impact-based models should be based on mutual understanding of the usage needs and the developers of such models. We're facing that problem with artificial intelligence. We have a nice box, we deliver it to everywhere, and we expect that it solves the problems. No, it's not like that. It's definitely not like that, because many of the communities, least developed countries, do not know what to do with these tools. And also there is also an element of trust that the distinguished representative of the UNDRR mentioned yesterday in a private conversation. In fact, he mentioned also that these new technologies do not land in the hands of the many of our stakeholders in the least developed countries. So the gap is widening. This is also an important element that we need to understand. 2 days ago, I was in JICA, and a distinguished expert also mentioned, based on his own experience in the Pacific Island countries and territories, he clearly said, we cannot take the standard operational procedures of Japanese Meteorological Agency and hand it over to somewhere in another institute in the small island developing states. We need to adapt our thinking to their conditions. That flexibility is very important. Now again, of course, the very comment I mentioned earlier. So my very subjective conclusions are, while the potential benefits of the impact-based, in this example, tsunami inundation, forecasting may be questionable for the last mile, for the individuals in the field, in terms of the behavioral change, it has a great potential, in my view, to influence the mindset of the disaster, emergency managers and policymakers towards a more holistic disaster risk reduction, response and recovery framework. This is an important element we cannot overlook, especially in countries with limited resources and also where the tsunami is not the highest among the natural hazard profile. We need to consider the sustainability of our efforts. In case of major disasters, though, advanced impact-based forecasts can considerably reduce the time needed for the post-disaster needs assessment process, ensuring a quick start of the disaster recovery process. And this is probably what the Secretary Solidum mentioned yesterday, the importance of boosting the economy as soon as possible so that our investment does not disappear. And also, as Kushmira Sensei mentioned yesterday, if we can quantify the impact, we can quantify the recovery process, and that will help the recovery process at all. My last remark is that it's very important to continue the international collaboration. This is not a challenge that we can individually address. And these days, especially, it's more important to underline the importance of international collaboration in these efforts, regardless of various national motivations may be in place. Thank you very much for your attention.